It's all yours, Sheila G.
Namaste, Kelly G. Dhanyavad. मेरा नाम शीला है. मैं स्कॉटलैंड पैदा हुई, लेकिन मैं सफोक, इंग्लैंड रहती हूँ. लेकिन अमेरिका, नाइजीरिया और भारत में रहती थी. आज मैं आपको भारत में अपने समय के बारे में बात करूँगी. मैं यहाँ 2 साल तक रही, November 2009 to December 2011. सबसे पहले मैंने आपको 4 चीज़ों के बारे में बताना चाहता हूँ. मैं भारत क्यों गई, मैं कहाँ थी, मैंने कैसा काम किया, मेरा जीवन कैसा था. अब से मैं अंग्रेजी बोलूंगी. Okay, hope you followed all that. So I went to India with an organization called VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas. And they place people in placements that they've vetted. So they vet the placement and they vet the people. And I can talk, if anybody's interested, about how they vet you, because it's quite intensive. So I spent the first month there in Delhi, a bit of acclimatization, both culturally, climatically, finding out a little bit how VSO worked locally, and of course doing the tourist sites. And of course, being British, I had to take the pose that Princess Di made so famous at the Taj Mahal. So that's me sitting in front of the Taj Mahal. I don't know to this day how we managed to have not people milling round about us, but it worked. So, in keeping with what other people did on their talks, I took the maps, and I think everybody knows where London is and everybody knows where Delhi is. But I only stayed in Delhi for a month. So an 8-hour flight, landed late at night, finally got to my room in the hostel at about 4:30 in the morning, I think, once we collected everybody that was arriving. And I spent the first month there, and then I was put on a train. My first experience of Indian trains was traveling overnight from Delhi all the way through the center of India down to Rayagada in Odisha. Now, Google at the moment says that's 1 day and 5 hours. I sort of remember it as being slightly longer than that, but I arrived sort of middle of the day, middle of the afternoon. So this is Odisha here on the eastern seaboard of India. Occupies probably just about a third of the area down there. It's quite a big state. When I was in Delhi, most people were getting Hindi lessons, and I did sit on a few, hence my first few Hindi words. But I was going to a place where my placement said it would have limited conversations for limited availability of conversations in English, and that I would have to try and pick up a little bit of Oriya. So I'd never heard of Oriya. I had no idea what it looked like, and I had no idea what it sounded like. And VSO tried to get me a tutor in Delhi, and this is 2009, and failed miserably trying to get me a tutor. But they did come up with a book, and it's still, as far as I can find out, the only book written about Odia from a self-help teaching perspective. It doesn't use the script, it uses phonetics, and apologies to anybody who does speak Odia in the group, but I will try and remember how to pronounce this. Apana Committee Ashanti is how you say, how are you? Mubalachi is I'm fine. And Moragoti Bahiochi is I have a book. So my memory of Odia is very, very patchy. I learned most of it sort of communicating with tradespeople and shopkeepers in the market. But this guy was a Danish professor and he had lived in Bhubaneswar in Odisha, and he wrote this book phonetically. And now you can still get it to view online for free. For people that are linguists in the group, I thought you might like to see the script and how it's different from Hindi. So on the left is the philology of Oriya, and down here from the old script. And on the right is the same root for Devanagari that we know in Hindi. So you can see it's not that far back that it starts to diverge. And in the middle, you see the consonants area here, which is, approximately the same sort of layout as you have in textbooks for Devanagari, the ka, ga, ga, etc. And then at the top, the vowels and the diacritics, so the all the long and the short vowels, and then examples with the ka to begin with. So very similar in how it's laid out, but totally different looking script. And I have to say, I never made head nor tail of it. I could just about recognise in the dark the railway station name at Raigad. I think I'd like to hear somebody speak it properly. So, classic thing to use, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is written in Devanagari with a transliteration. And there's a recording there. And then this is it written in Oriya, the transliteration here. And I'll play the recording because it's quite short. And you see if you can see where there are similarities and where there are differences.
सबु मनुष्य जन्म कालर स्वाधीन सेमानंकर मर्यादा और अधिकार समान सेमानंक ठारे प्रज्ञा और विवेक निहित अछि सेमाने परस्पर प्रति भातृभाव पोषण करी कार्य करिबा दरकार.
And can I just check that that audio came across okay?
All good.
All good. Thank you. Right. So this is Orissa, the state of Orissa, a seaboarding state. And I was based down in Raigada, down here in the south, very close to the border with Andhra Pradesh, which was a much more prosperous state than Orissa. Orissa was and is the 8th largest state by area, the 11th by population, and it has the 3rd largest population of scheduled tribes within India. I visited Balanapatna, Koraput, and Puri in the time I was there, along with various villages local within the Raigada district. And also Vishakhapatnam, which is a city down on the Andhra Pradesh coast, and Araku, which is a sort of hill village at the borders between the two districts. And also the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which were very nice, relaxing holiday. So this is Orissa in the brown here up on the right-hand side, and you'll see it occupies probably just under a 1/3 of the length of the coast, Andhra Pradesh here, Bengal, coming all the way down to the point. So when I was there, the social issues that were prevalent were to do with, for example, the lack of electricity in most of the area. So you see here, Oriya in pink, about 40–50% of the population area has access to electricity. And you see the blackness here, equivalent more like to what you're up in the Thar. It has knock-on consequences, so with agriculture and what have you, but underweight women in those days was a big issue about nutritional well-being. And the 5 or 6 states in the Middle Eastern part of India here were way down in this metric that people use to determine development issues in those days. So other way around that, areas below the poverty line, areas with low GDP, you begin to see the pattern that existed there. So I went to work for an organisation called Shakti in Raigada, and this is Shakti's old premises now, but premises as was when I first joined them. Basically, the only sign on the outside to begin with was this blue sign here. Otherwise, the director lived on, and his family lived on the top floor. This sign was not present, and the bottom floor was the offices for Shakti. So very little in the way that would indicate to a passerby that anything was happening like what was happening in that office. So the 2011 census happened when I was there. Give you a bit better feel for the district. A population then of 961,000, split between men and women, 470 to 490 odd for women. The majority of people living in rural areas, often quite inaccessible areas through forests and up and down hills, very hilly terrain in parts of Odisha. The average literacy rate was about 50%, but that varied amazingly between men and women, of 63 and just about 40% for women. Land distribution became an issue for cultivation and hence for people's dietary well-being, because very little of the land was actually owned by the people who actually farmed it. So they reckon about 32% of the food-producing land was held by tribal people. And all this really was highly dependent on the monsoon season. So with 30% of the land available for cultivation, and only 19% of that was actually irrigated. So the main cultivation method was shifting cultivation, practiced particularly on the hilly slopes. And of course that led to quite significant shortages throughout the state for basic necessities and consequential health issues that we saw with the metric for women's weight. So this is Shakti today, and you can follow the link to their website, but you'll see that they do issues of community health. They're involved in empowering women. They have livelihoods programs. They have senior citizens programs. They have 2 old age people's homes now. They have water and sanitation projects. They work with children's rights. They have children's schools, and they do education programs throughout the district. So they've moved on amazingly. I had hoped to show you the website that we actually built together, but as of a few months ago, they've actually now got someone who's been redoing their website. So although it's still got a couple of issues in it, I was very pleased to see that they're still using the logo that we built together. So one of the first things that I was involved in doing there was going around all the people working in the organisation and visiting the outposts in the villages and the local offices, meeting all the project officers, finding out how they worked, what the issues were that they were encountering in their work, talking to the director similarly. And one of the things that became very apparent was they had no public face. So people really didn't know much about them other than very locally. And so when you're applying for grant aid and to participate in national projects and that, with this is 2009, remember, and people were beginning to be very conscious of checking the internet and checking your social media and things like that to see if this organisation was active and legitimate and what have you. So without a webpage and without some sort of public face, you were getting marked down on these things and not getting through. So we worked together to come up with a logo that reflected what people actually thought the organisation was doing. And this is the logo that we designed as a group, in the colours of the Indian national flag, of course, and helping hands, raising people up, lifting them up the hill or up a social ladder, or however you want to interpret that. They've only made one change on this in all the time they've used it, and that is to change the English representation of Shakti organisation excuse me, into an Adia side as well. So they use the two interchangeably now. Two of the other projects that I was involved in when I was there that I feel very privileged to have been and proud to be involved in was the advent of Childline. So Childline was an Indian national organisation for assisting, just the same way as it does in the UK, children who are in distress. And Shakti became the first organisation in Rayagada to steer Childline into Orissa. The second one was the Light a Billion Lives campaign, which was run by an Indian organisation called TERI. And this was to bring solar power and lanterns into remote communities. That was a really worthwhile and very good project that they did. So this is Rayagada Town Centre. This is the main drag into the market. Very busy, as you'll see, mostly push bikes, motorbikes, and not until you strain your eyes to go right back there do you find a vehicle that's got more than 2 wheels. So it gives you a feeling for the lifestyle of people in the area. Most people walking or on 2 wheels. This is where I lived. This is my house. I had the anti-annex, which was this bit here. This is my apartment. And then my landlady and her family lived in the bottom section here. And the first year I was there, there wasn't an upper floor at all. This started to get built in the second year, along with a lot of building in the area, as you'll see. Now, from this picture, you can see it's either during or sometime soon after the monsoon. This is a dirt track that comes down to the houses here that were quite near the railway line. No paved roads into this part of town. The hills in the back, you see all the mist, and you can see the water line in the mud track. So you can imagine what this was like when it was full monsoon. And of course, the growth in the green space between buildings grew dramatically at that time of year. So this is me just outside my front door, and people from home kept asking me, questions like, where are you going to live? Do you know what your accommodation is going to be like? And my reply would be along the lines that, well, my official placement office says this. It would be in Rayagada town, it would be independent and have basic amenities. A room with attached bathroom and space for a kitchen. Not a kitchen, just space for a kitchen. Basic furniture of a bed, table and chairs will be provided. Cooking will be by gas stove and a fridge will be provided. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, I'm getting a fridge. The height of excitement. So this is what the apartment looked like that very first day when I came off the train in Rayagada and was picked up by my colleague, taken to the office, and then taken to the place which was going to be my home for the next 2 years. So this was the kitchen area, the sitting room area, my bed. My bed actually hadn't arrived. And so for the first few months, I had a mattress on this, almost like a trestle table arrangement under my mosquito net, of course. It's perfectly acceptable to sleep on after I got used to the fact that it was actually quite narrow compared with my bed at home. The toilet area was the usual squat, but I did have a flush on my squat, unlike some of my colleagues who had to chuck buckets. My desk then arrived a few months later on, and my fridge took a lot longer. There's interesting stories behind buying a fridge. But over time, you know, this became a work area with my gas cooker, and this became a storage area with my things on the shelf. All very open, unlike what I'm used to in this country. And in the second year, I made a little video for people at home just to see where I was living. So I'm going to just play that. It's about 6 minutes long, I think. Unusual grill and padlock that is the common way of locking doors here. Currently it's open, of course. And this is my home. Just keep the heat and the light out for a second. Okay, so the room here is the sitting room area with the chair that I bought, a lovely lounging wooden chair, which was my one treat of a purchase when I first got here. So it's a wooden frame on which I have placed a mattress and a cover, and it's very comfortable. I spend my reading time and film watching time sitting there, as you can see, with my cup of tea ready to hand, the Guardian, the crossword book, my e-reader all by the side of my chair. Another very valuable piece of equipment is the fridge. Been very reliable and indispensable really in this climate for keeping things fresh. We'll turn around to the other side of the room here. And this is my desk and chair area, where my computer and notebooks and other electrical goodies are positioned. And then moving into the kitchen area, my kitchen shelves with containers stocking the basics that you find in any kitchen. And the pots and pans and food supplies. Moving around the water filter, you have to boil and filter all the water here. Although actually I think it probably isn't that necessary, particularly in this house, as every house on this area has their water from a sealed well, a bore well, private to the house, so it should be fine. And this is my kitchen area at the moment. My preparations for dinner being cooked on the 2-ring gas stove, which is we have for cooking on, the gas bottle below, and the washing up area and sink. And that basically is the first room, which is where I spend most of my time when I'm actually at home, and certainly most of the time at the weekends. Into the second room, this is the bedroom area. I have acquired a Pilates ball and mat in the last few weeks, because getting exercise in this climate and in this culture is actually very hard. So Andy, I'm really missing your motivational gym sessions. I do miss them. I'm not as good without you to guide me on. So I'm going to try and do some ball exercises and try and maintain that core strength, which I think is disappearing. Anyway, this is my bed, typical Indian bed with a wooden frame with a wooden board. Wooden frame, wooden board, and very firm. My mattress is about a couple of inches thick. It actually is not a mattress. It actually was Hillary's sofa bed. And I lugged it all the way back from Koraput on the train. Here it is, replacing the mattress and giving me the mattress that's comfortable backing on my chair. The sofa bed is actually better for sleeping on. So, mosquito net, which I sleep under every night. And also my emergency light supply, my Trevor Bayliss wind-up light, which was my treat to myself coming out. I'm so glad I bought those because they have been indispensable in times of power cuts and power outages. And my washing clothes waiting to get done, and in the far corner of this room is really the only other area for storing things, so all luggage and bags and clothes and books and everything has to get left here. I have one lockable wood, metal chest, very flimsy, but not really meant to be a deterrent to human visitors. It's more a deterrent to rodent visitors. And so my most valuable things from that point of view are actually in there. I'll save you the trip to the toilet and we'll move on. This is the path that I would take from the house up to the office. So it was a couple of blocks effectively to walk to the office up these paths. This is sort of like a wider view. And you'll see, you know, there are houses, but there's quite a lot of green space. Yeah. If I look at that area nowadays, it's very different. So I can't actually get down the lane with the Google Maps, but this is the next block up. And you'll see that it's absolutely crowded out with buildings now. Very, very different environment to what I was living in. So I was living in an area that was almost semi-rural. So in the middle of Nagar was a standpipe, which was used by many of the people who lived in the area who didn't have piped water into their houses. Only the more affluent houses had the bore wells, which were the first thing that was built when a new house was built. The well was drilled. The water was then pumped up to a tank on the roof, and then that came down into the building. Huge amount of trucks going through the area because the main road ran from Vishakhapatnam and the Andhra Pradesh coast right up into the inner part of India. Main road, so lots of truck drivers going up and down it. Local transport was more by tuk-tuks and bikes and tractors and trailers and bicyclists and what have you. So very sort of rural space between these groups of houses in the Nagar when I lived there. My neighbour's house, so this is the way I would walk up to work, along here up to the office. Everywhere cows, very, very few motorised vehicles. The guys from the local college would play on the space between the buildings, play cricket. Through the Nagar every year would come various farmers, either carting their hay paddy to market, or loads and loads of goats. And every year, a farmer would bring this huge herd of goats, presumably going off to market to be sold or slaughtered, and then would completely take over the area outside my house and eat everything and sundry, and then they move on. But other things lived in the undergrowth between the houses as well, which I had to be a bit more careful about. This is just a brown snake, it's harmless, but there were cobras about. Everywhere the cows and the buffalo roamed. And I thought it was interesting to think back on what I had written about our local buffalo milk producing lady. She owned a herd of 20 cows, and each cow was worth at that time between 20 and 25,000 rupees, I was told. That made her herd worth in the region of 500,000 rupees. Now, milk in those days was about 20 rupees a litre to buy, and a cow gives about 20 litres of milk a day. That means about 400 rupees a day per day of a 30-day month. So about 1,200, about 12,000 rupees a month per cow. Compare that with what my colleagues as development workers were getting paid, a minimum of 8,000 rupees a month. So our cow lady was actually really quite well off. My colleague Harish, who had met me when I first stepped off the train, left the following year to take up a government job, and his salary for the same type of job as he was doing in the third sector was 25,000 rupees a month plus a car. So you can see money is an issue in terms of people's salary. I did mention that there's a lot of building work going on, and everything is conditioned by the weather. When it rains, it rains. The people that have never experienced a monsoon, this is what the monsoon outside my house looked like. Everything just turned into little rivers of water. You know, even the cows were a bit downtrodden and sad on the road home. You know. But it was thick rain, sheets of rain, if you've never experienced it. Many people will have, but some people won't, I'm sure. And it has quite dramatic consequences because Odisha is one of the 6 most cyclone-prone areas in the world. And in 1999, it was hit by a super cyclone with winds of 160 miles an hour, a 20-foot storm surge that went inland to about 20 miles, and lots of heavy rain in and around that, resulting in over 20,000 flood embankments being breached by rivers. So it destroyed all the crops, all the sugarcane, and there were about 10,000 fatalities, most of which occurred in a place in the north of Odisha. And the damage from that was estimated to be about 4.4 billion US dollars. Now, in anybody's book, that's a lot of money. But the government of Odisha actually did something quite remarkable in its day and quite successful, in that they set up the first Indian state agency focused exclusively on disaster management. And boy, did it pay off. When I was there was a lot of NGOs, including mine, working in the field of disaster preparedness, either with physical things or with social things to do with getting people through the next cyclone, because they knew there would be a next one. So I picked out a few just to give you an idea how big and how frequent these can be. So we all know about the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. Probably the worst bit of India in that area, in Odisha, that was hit was actually the Nicobar Islands. The south of India got hit really badly, and the official death toll was about 11,000 for India, and including missing about 7,000 for in and around the Nicobar Islands. In 2013, just after I left, and Cyclone Phelan went through, that's equivalent to a Category 5 hurricane if you are more inclined to look at the hurricane scale. Again, same sort of order of magnitude of wind speed. It made landfall actually just down the coast from us in Golapur, and it impacted loads of people, but they evacuated 1 million people. Can you imagine evacuating 1 million people in a few days? And they only had 46 fatalities. So we've gone from almost 10,000 fatalities in 1999 to 46 in 2013. That's a phenomenal achievement. But the devastation was over $4 million, whereas in 1999 they were counting in billions. However, Fanny went through in 2019. It was a greater wind speed, but not as low pressure, and then everything really did kick in. They had emergency workers in place, they had volunteers in place, they had communications networks set up, and they had built 9,000 storm shelters inland, and they had kitchens to support the people in those shelters. So that time, there was only 72 deaths in total on the eastern seaboard, of which there were 64 in Odessa. So again, a huge drop in the loss of life, but substantial damage because it was so powerful winds that went through and such a lot of associated weather. So it's quite a traumatic coastline for weather. Lots of building work going on when I was there, much of it done by day labourers. Many of those day labourers were women. Quite interesting to watch them move things from ground floor level up to second floor level with this lifting contraption on our house, and also to see the sort of scaffolding frameworks that were used in some of the other buildings. But one of the things that all the building work did do was to improve the paths on the Nagar. So they recarved out these paths and hard-cored them. Although they were still dirt tracks, they were much more substantial and solid, and they made walking a lot easier along the lanes throughout the whole of the year. The main road out of Rayagada, as was not anywhere near as good a road as it is nowadays. So just by way of contrast a little bit, I'll play a little bit of this, turn off the sound because it's very noisy and bumpy. So you see here a very, it's a busy road, left and right, one direction, multiple directions, people moving back and forward, trucks and carts, bikes mainly, and a lot of, debris and cutting up of the road surface on what was a main truck road in and out of Rayagada going north. Give you a feeling for the area, and this is Rayagada town centre. This is the market area down here, and I lived, make sure I can move this without jumping out. I lived up here on Sri Priya Nagar, and basically round about second lane, which was about here, and if we can, it's not going to work, don't worry. So living about a 15-minute tuk-tuk drive from the shopping market, it was a trip into town to do your shopping, but of course shopping was a thing that I had to do because I was cooking for myself and what have you. This is my landlady and her daughter and I on a shopping trip into town. This is my chicken seller and her husband, who were migrant workers from a neighbouring state. I can tell you interesting stories about becoming a regular on a stall for chicken. And this is my sabziwala, who I had neither of these two ladies spoke any Oriya, and neither of them spoke any Hindi, and so our communication was a little bit, a few words here and there, and understanding numbers, and that got us through buying and selling between us. But my sabziwala wandered the Nagar with her basket on her head. She would buy about, I reckon, about 100 rupees worth of vegetables in the main market each day, walk around the area and the houses where I lived and sold those, and only when she had finished what was in her basket did she go and buy something else. This is my friend Catherine, who'd come to visit. This is my apple cellar. Apples were quite a rarity. They're not grown in the state. And this young man had an apple stall. He only sold apples, and he had the best apples I found anywhere in Rayagada. And he had a little stall halfway between the market and my house. So every time I went into market, I would stop the tuk-tuk on the way back and buy some apples from this guy. This is typical stalls in the market. So a lady would, you know, and most of them were ladies, but not all. They would come in from the villages with baskets and what on their heads or on their cart, and they would sell whatever vegetables they had available in those days. So we've got jackfruit here, chilies, cauliflower. I think that's turmeric up the top. What have you? Sweet potatoes here, some sort of gourd, some limes, and I think there's a cabbage down the bottom. This is a young man who sold the best beans ever. He just seemed to have this amazing crop of beans. And when he was around, I was always buying beans from him. But nothing goes to waste because the cows were everywhere and they just ate everything that was dumped. So these are typical market scenes from the centre of Rayagada. Peanut season was one of my delights. When the peanuts came in, I was always one of the first to get to this lady to get my peanuts. As I said, a lot of building work. And that main road, I'll try and show you it later, and the main road is now a sort of dual carriageway with buildings on all sides. You'd think it was the middle of a huge city, and lots of cars and traffic on it. But to build that road, which came straight up from the coast inland, I think someone drew a line on a map, and then a bulldozer executed the line. And what it meant was that it knocked down part of the front of various buildings. And when it did so, it left all the rubble strewn across the road. So people had to, you know, move where they parked their bikes, negotiate their way in and out of these shops and or houses, and some very precarious walkways into accommodation. And of course, some people lived above the shops, and they lost half of their buildings. Because all these buildings will have gone now because they've got these huge modern buildings all around the centre of the new road. The new road is actually much better than the old one in terms of surface. So change of tack, and we went to Puri. So this was a little bit of a break for us volunteers. We had a meeting of all the volunteers and a little bit of a sightseeing trip. So we visited the Konark Sun Temple in Puri, which is a relic of a temple, I suppose, is the way to look at it. But it's built in the shape of the layout of a chariot. And you can go and read it all up, but the entranceway was its large animal prowling at the front, and then a platform and what have you, and then the main body of the building, and then this huge area, walled area, which would have been the whole temple when it was originally conceived. But people wander all over the parts of it. Trees climb all over the parts of it. Some bits are better preserved than others. These rampant animal figurines at the front of the entranceway. But it has beautiful and what must have been stunning carvings in the brickwork, in the stonework, all round the temple itself. All the deities, all the stories that go with it. Some of them very explicit, and these marvelous cartwheels. So, because it's laid out as a chariot, these are the wheels of the chariot, and they're just such detail would have been in place in these to begin with, and even nowadays, absolutely lovely to look at. some of the higher, excuse me, some of the higher figurines are much better preserved. Suraj, the sun god, is obviously a sun temple. And a lovely, very interesting place to visit. Puri is also known for the Jagannath temple. So temples in southern India are slightly different than temples in northern India. They tend to have these very large towering towers at their entrance points. And they also tend to be have walls, almost square walls, almost like a fort in many ways, and these very regularly defined, intricate roofs with full of idols carved into it. And the inside of the walls, everything happens. Life goes on in here. It's very, very busy. Comings and goings, people buying and selling, people doing pujas, what have you. Certainly when I was there as a foreigner, as a non-believer, you couldn't actually enter into the inside of that one. But one of the most delightful moments I had in Puri was actually down on the beach. And I encountered this group of elderly women who had obviously been sojourned into Puri for their beliefs, but they had come down to the beach and they had been paddling in the sea. And you can see the sheer delight on their faces. And I suspect, although I was never able to find out, that maybe some of them hadn't actually seen the sea because they were just actually quite overcome by being there, which was lovely to see. But the Orissa coast is a fishing area, and they fish from these wooden boats, which are all individually painted. And they still today catch lots of fish into the eastern seaboard there. In Rayagada, I mainly ate river fish, rohu and kapla and chinguri. Yeah, I like my fish in Rayagada. One of the nice things when you're living in a culture for so long is you get to go to weddings and celebrations. So I'll flick through some wedding and celebration photographs for you. This is Pinky, my neighbour, as she was getting ready for her wedding, with all her hand work being done. It was at night. The time very specifically organised by the priest to check the time, made sure that the groom's arrival was at the appropriate time to meet the bride. And this is I don't actually know what is really happening here, so if anybody does know, then please tell me. But they seem to be playing a game of dice between the husband and the wife, and this lady is making them throw the dice, and it's an interesting thing. So she's lifting the dice, putting them in his hand, and then putting his hand over her hand, and then the bride flings the dice. And it's absolutely not chaotic noise, so I'm not putting the audio on. Huge meals for everybody in the local area. I mean, I lost count of how many people were there. And all the children were kept quiet by giving ice cream, so that they were in their element, in their best dresses, their best jewellery, and it was a lovely night. It was nice to have been invited. I also went to a Bharat Gora, which is a sacred thread ceremony. This was for the nephew of one of my colleagues, and it happened in a village called Terubali, which is north of Rayagada. That was a little bit of a trek to get there. I was picked up from my house by a colleague on a motorbike. I was deposited in a village halfway there. I was ushered to a lady who was going to the wedding, who spoke no language I had in common with her at all, but assured me that she was going where I was going. And we then got on another bus and went to Terubali. and then we had to get a tuk-tuk from where the bus stop was to the temple where this was happening. So this is like a rite of passage for the young boy. So this is, it says nowadays 41 minutes by car. I think it took more like 2.5 hours to get there, and actually not as long to get back. So this is part of the ceremony where they mash up turmeric and plaster it all over the young man's face. And again, it's very noisy, so I'll put the noise level on so that you can hear the noise level and then turn it off. Kids everywhere, aren't they? So again, it's very difficult. It was very difficult for me to understand what was actually going on at this, because actually nobody except the man who invited me spoke any English, and he was one of the main recorders of the gifts for the day, so he was very busy. But it was an experience because I met so many people at this function, including my colleague's wife, who was one of the best cooks I ever came across. And she was cooking for this wedding. But here you see everybody wanting to get in on the act of putting some of the turmeric onto this young boy. And then this is a second half again, and you'll see how everybody gets in on the act of what is going on. You see his thread, you see his stick is also a significant part of the thing. And everybody's queuing up, as I'm being told by this man sitting here, going, yeah, take pictures, take pictures. So one of the other places we went to was Vishakhapatnam, which is on the Andhra Pradesh coast. That's very different because we had, plusher hotels. So a colleague of mine, Judy, and we went to visit some of the temples there as well. So here you'll see much more clearly these towered entranceways that I was talking about, and the sort of quadrangle of structures that give you walls that give yard to the yard. And then the entranceway here, which at that time was wooden structure covered by leaves for shade as you queued to get in. Very, very busy. Nowadays, all these covered walkways have been built. And this is not my picture, but you can see the same part of the building, the striped part of the building here, but this one gives you a better idea of how large an area these temples cover and how big these gates are. Yeah, quite small entranceways, but huge pyramid structures. They're quite distinctive. The beach areas around there are lovely. They're nice and flat, coastline from high up. It's also the centre for Telugu cinema. So we visited the cinema studios, and they have these huge built lots. This is like a lot with a police station. There's like a lot that gives a sort of viewpoint view. And up on the hill, they have these huge, enormous statues of Shiva and Parvati. They're about 40 feet high, I would estimate. Huge white things, very, very distinctive, seen from a while away. And as some of you know, I'm a lover of games. And this, although the video's not exactly very good, it's a game that these women were playing in the park. And it's a circular game, and it's a sort of tag game. And I think what you see in the middle here, if I remember right, were their shoes. And they were sort of trying to see who would give in first to grab a shoe and get the shoe back to their team. And then, as you saw there, somebody actually got one, and then so the next two ladies would come in. It's really nice to see people out enjoying themselves outside, because that was not how most people lived. This was much more common in the villages rather than the towns, to see these constructions made of whatever material was available, and life taking place outside of the house itself. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands were a piece of light relief. I actually broke my arm on the first couple of days that I was in Rayagada. And so this was my first trip away after I had the cast taken off my arm. So from Rayagada to Vishakhapatnam in those days was probably about a 6-hour train journey. Vishakhapatnam to Port Blair was about a two-hour flight, a little bit longer in those days. And the Andaman and Nicobar Islands sort of straddle this area here in the Indian Ocean. So they run on the same underground mountain chain that parts of Malaysia come in and come up here, so they're all connected underwater. The Nicobar Islands to the south and the Andaman Islands to the north. From Port Blair, we then took a boat for our boat journey to Havelock Island, to Svaradweep, and then 20 minutes to where we actually stayed. So I was in my element on the boat ride, and we had a bit of luxury glamping on the beach at Havelock Island. This is one of those ones that you tend to notice odd signs: the Holiday Inn laundry and the Lord's Bakery. But most life happened on the water between the islands and the chain, either for fishing or for moving people around. I love these boats, very open, but smooth rides. When I was there, just before, there was this article in the paper about the death of the last Bo speaker. So Bo was indigenous language to the Andaman Islands. And this lady, Bo Shra, died just a few weeks before we went. And I was incredibly moved by this, because this lady, according to the article, had spent the last few years of her life unable to converse with anyone in her mother tongue. She was the last surviving speaker of what was a very, very ancient language. Beach number 7, Havelock Island, the Andaman Islands. Just love the sound of waves, and it's a very open and flat beach. It's beautiful. So to wind up a little bit more about Shakti, as I said, they do all these different programs. This was people who were resident in the old age people's home when I was there, and I visited them quite a lot. They were a lovely group of people, always very welcoming, and particularly the men played this game called Carom. I don't know if Shan's on the call, but we were discussing this in Storyweaver recently about learning to play this game. It was played by the kids in the area, and it was just chaotic. Played by the men in the old age people home, oh no, very, very serious. They also still do a lot of education intervention work. This is the school that they ran when I was there. They now run 2 main schools and feeders. So my friend Catherine was a language teacher from the UK, and so she very kindly volunteered to give a class to the school kids when I was there. So this is the administrative officer, this is the teacher, this is the cook, this is my colleague, my 2 friends. So there's one with me in it. Went several times, I have lots of pictures. The kids that went to the school had all been working before they were brought back into education. So they'd all probably left education much earlier. So this is a mixed year class. They get fed in the middle of the day, rice, lentils, dal, very simple, cooked on the premises. Shakti works with their parents to enable the parents to allow the children to go to school. So the boys would have been labouring, some of the girls as well. Some of the girls might have been acting as maids, housemaids in people's houses, that type of thing. Now they're back at school. And when I was there, Shakti had an incredible conversion rate of getting these kids, 90% of these kids went on to state schools and completed their state schooling. There was no water in the school that existed when I was there, so they had to bring in water from the standpipes, and all the kids had to participate in cleaning up after they ate. So this is Catherine giving one of the classes in the school. This is the teacher giving her class. And it was everything from the health and well-being through to the educational well-being of these kids. So both boys and girls had to make sure all their hands were clean, all that hygiene in the area, because waterborne diseases are particularly prevalent. And when you see where these kids live, you'll understand why. These were a group of kids that I got to know quite well. This was the son of the administrator, and these two, I think, were brothers. And this little lad seemed to photobomb all my photos. Every time I was in the market, he would be there. He seemed to be around everywhere, trying to get in on my photographs. And these two kids were really funny. But this is where they lived. They lived in the slum area, one of the slum areas of Raigada, along the side of the main road, in these very haphazard houses. And their parents were migrant labourer. They would be day rate paid on jobs that would come one day and not the next day. We did lots of AIDS and disability issues, HIV and AIDS and disability issue training when I was there. We ran a project on photography for documenting their program work. Remember right back at the beginning I was saying about most people in the area being illiterate, particularly women. So a lot of the training that was done for mother and child health by the project workers was done with visual aids rather than written aids. And this is the sort of terrain that the project officers had to negotiate. So we got stuck one day. We were in the van, and we could go no further. So we had to walk up the hill, and we walked up the hill to Kaimara Pass village, which was where we were going with the Light a Billion Lives campaign man from Terry organisation. There was a women's self-help group meeting happening the same day. This was the road between Mara Pass and Barron Pass. We went up and down over the hills, over the ravines, through the paddy fields, up the hill to Muscatiri village. And all the village turned out for this meeting to determine whether they would participate in this Light a Billion Lives project. Give you a feeling for how far that was, if I can work this on interactively. So here's Raigada, going north, below the dark blue line, and there's Muscatiri. Now, it's not going to work. I can show you that later on if it works. So Muscatiri is here. There's a river that comes down around here. Kaimara Pass is about there, and Barron Pass is about there. As you see, the road sort of goes close by now, but nowhere near where we got to. But this was what the goal was, to give these villages in the hills solar power to enable local people to make a living from maintaining the solar power installation, from renting out the lanterns, such that people in the village could then do whatever they wanted to do in the evenings by light, being areas without electricity. And I was very glad to see when just after I left the following year, was sent this quite grainy photograph of the installation in the village. So the project was well underway and quite a success. Other project they did was putting names on people's houses with the names of the occupants. Very important when the name that people tend to use is not their real name. Or not their full name, and then the wrong name gets on your official documentation and you can't vote, you can't claim your rice allowance. And so now when the collectors come and document these areas, they just need to read the signs and they know who lives in that house. This is a sort of typical village meeting. And one last project tell you about was one about collecting eggs, so that we would start a project that was to do with backyard poultry. So we sourced these eggs from down by Koraputwe, and basically Shakti then had a project going where couples would, the man would construct the chicken coop, and then usually the wife would continue the business, rearing the chickens from the eggs, selling the eggs on to neighbours or into market, eating the eggs, eating the occasional chicken, thereby improving their diets and their livelihoods. I realised I hadn't said anything about food, and food is a big thing in life, and my favourite Adisa food was this biribari, which is urad dal, deep fried dough, I suppose I would describe them, with various spices. Finally, Araku Valley. My friends and I went on a visit, and we were found by the local newspaper. So we made the local newspaper, these three English ladies in this remote place. This is the sort of Eastern Ghats that we traversed from on the way up. Some stunning views across the hills. So a big pepper growing area. This is actually a queue for your rice allowance. Typical market views again. The only place I saw sugarcane. We visited the Chapari water cascade, which is this lovely area of flowing water down this river over big rocks. Bora Caves, which were these caves underneath the Ghats that you could go into, and no camera does them justice. And finally, sadly, it was time for me to leave Rayagada. And I was given a lovely gift by my colleagues, my sari. I was able to pick the colours, so again I picked the colours of the Indian flag, and was presented by the sari that I wore on the last day. And we all had a picnic down by the river. So these are the group of people that I work with, at least some of the ones that managed to get in from the villages that day to join the group of us that worked actually in the office. And the one place I didn't talk about was the month that I spent in Rajasthan. So I leave it as a taster. One of my friends took this picture of me reading on the roof of a hostel in Jaisalmer.